everyone, and welcome to Talk2BeWell with Providence St. Joseph Health. I'm your host, Dr. Robin Henderson, bringing you a real conversation on teen mental health from the people who know best, teens. Joining me today is our teen expert from the Work2BeWell Student Advisory Council, Derek Evans. Our discussion today is about a topic many students know all too well, academic anxiety. Remember, everyone, if you have additional questions about this subject or mental health overall, we can be found at Wellbeing Trust on Twitter and Facebook, and also now on Instagram. Speaking of social, be sure to follow the hashtag Work2BeWell. That's hashtag Work2BeWell Student Advisory Council on Instagram at Work2BeWell. I'm a psychologist and the Chief Executive of Behavioral Health for Providence St. Joseph Health in Oregon. I'm also the clinical liaison to Wellbeing Trust, the organization working to improve the mental, social, and spiritual health of our nation. Before we start, I want you to know that the information provided during this podcast is for educational purposes only. You should always consult your healthcare provider if you have any questions regarding a medical condition or treatment. So let's get started by welcoming Derek to the show. Derek, thank you so much for joining me. Can you share just a little bit about yourself and the role you play with the Work2BeWell Student Advisory Council?
Yeah, thank you for having me. My name is Derek Evans. I am a co-director for the strategy committee of the Work2BeWell Council, and we were recently elected to that position, me and my counterpart, last month, and we've been on the council since, I believe, November was our first meeting?
Something like that.
Sometime around there. But, yeah.
So I'm really curious. You have a passion for talking about academic anxiety, and I wonder if you could help our audience understand what that is.
So academic anxiety is really a very broad topic, in my opinion, because it comes in a lot of different forms and a lot of different ways and affects pretty much every single person differently. There's no two alike cases down to exactly the conditions and all of that. Academic anxiety is really just having to deal with something stressful in your work life at school, whether it's a test, whether it's your grades, something like that. Parents that are a little too strict on your grades can especially be one. But it pretty much just makes school a struggle for your daily life, and it makes academics something that you can't fully enjoy. So.
You know, I can remember, I know it was a while ago, but I can remember when I was in high school and yeah, we had anxiety and yeah, we had, some of those stressors of homework and stuff like that, but it feels different. It feels more intense today. Is that something you've heard?
Yeah, it's definitely something I've heard and something that I believe is a recurring theme in schools all across America. With the movement of classrooms onto online platforms, onto our phones through Quizlet, Kahoot, or Google Classroom, for example, the classroom is with us 24/7. We get alerts on our phones at any point throughout the day. Let that be at midnight. Sometimes I get emails at midnight reminding me that I have this assignment due at this time. So it's waking you up sometimes just to remind you, like, you have this to do. So I feel like academic anxiety has become something outside of the school and something that just becomes a permanent part of your life until you finally delete those apps off your phone with your graduation of high school or college.
That's a really good point. I don't remember teachers ever having that kind of access to me yet. It was not something, but last year when I have two teenagers who were in high school, and I remember one of the teachers said, "Oh, sign up for this reminder here for this science class." And you're right. It got so annoying. I deleted that text from my phone and said, "Yeah, I don't want these alerts anymore." But my kids had to live with that. That has to be really stressful to get those types of texts in the middle of the night that say, "You've got a chemistry exam tomorrow. Did you study?"
Yeah, it can be really stressful, especially if that's just one class. Some of us have 7 up to 8 classes, and we're getting alerts from all 8 of those classes simultaneously telling us that you have something to do right now, you should be doing it. And it kind of takes away from your free time and kind of just doesn't let you completely remove school from your brain just for any free time, which is pretty unhealthy if you ask me.
So when you're at school, you've got these devices, and I get it, these devices are endemic. Some schools have the attitude that, oh, gee, it's a good thing you can keep it with you during the day. Some schools have the attitude that, no, you need to put it in a box and take it away. What's your school like?
My school allows us to have it, but they are essentially locked down in the most strict way possible, in my opinion. It actually affects my ability to keep up to date with the BeWell Trust because I can't have access to my texts most of the time because the school has such bad service. Snapchat, which is a way that I communicate with fellow board members, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and even GroupMe and Remind can be blocked at the school at any given time, just about. So
Wow.
I'm pretty much in the dark at school from my actual life outside of school. It's not that great.
So how's that affect your stress level? How's that make you feel?
It's pretty weird because outside of school, where you're not supposed to be thinking about school 24/7, it's the only thing that you can think about because your phone is constantly buzzing, bugging you about what you have to do. While at school, you're told that your social media is a distraction. It's this bad. It's that bad. It becomes really stressful because you start losing who you really are and just start becoming the student and only the student because that's the only life that you're allowed to live because of the control that schools have over social media and kind of just the intrusiveness of all of these programs that they ask us to download.
Wow. This is such a fascinating topic. Anxiety disorders are the most common mental health concern in the United States. And I can see how all of this like stimulation around school where you're already going, okay, I've got that 4 point, and I've got to keep that 4 point going. I've got to keep these good grades going because if I don't keep the good grades going, I'm not going to get into XYZ college to set my career up, life, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Do you feel that kind of pressure?
I mean, I come from an upper middle class family and I definitely feel that. And that means that I have access to every single thing I need. I have access to computer, to my phone, to all of these devices I'm expected to have to keep up to date on my courses. Whereas there are students that live low income poverty level who don't have access to these, but are still expected to do the same work. So my academic anxiety is a lot different compared to those people just because they simply don't have access to things they're expected to have access to, which again just shows how great of a divide technology has caused in our education and how big a source of anxiety it can be.
I can imagine that would be extra stressful if you're expected to turn in your assignments on Google platform and you don't have a computer at home. How does that help you be successful? Do you see that in your fellow students?
I definitely do. Especially concerning the school district I come from, we have a large migrant family source of students that come in, and those families generally don't have access to those technologies. And this is something where I help out with students K through 5 with reading, with math, with all of this stuff on my free time. And a lot of the time, they're saying that they're expected to go on Duolingo for their ESL classes. They're expected to go on all of these other programs, but their only access to these is at the library, which is only open about 2 hours after school. So
wow. And for our listeners who don't know, what is lingo?
Duolingo is...
Duolingo.
Duolingo.
What is that?
It's kind of just an app that's supposed to kind of get you on the right track with learning a new language or furthering your education in the language. So, for example, I'm expected to use that for Spanish, which is how I've got to work with migrant families and students, is because it helps a lot with learning Spanish, actually. It's very effective at teaching different languages, but these students are immediately at a deficit because they don't have access to it. And it's pretty sad because it's super helpful, but the divide just doesn't allow for them to have that resource.
I imagine that that's also got to increase the anxiety that these young students are starting to feel as they're building up in their careers.
Yeah, certainly.
Well, we're gonna come back to some of these conversations about anxiety when we come back after a quick break. This is Talk to Be Well.
Can keep my hands on myself. Pick up dust them off, put them back up on the shelf. Kiss my little baby girl.
And we're back. This is Dr. Robin Henderson at Talk2BeWell, and I'm in studio with my guest, Derek Evans. We're talking about academic anxiety, and Derek, you and I have worked together for a while. We recently did a news segment where you shared your GPA, which was something like 4.2. Help me understand, how do you get a GPA over 4.0? Because when I went to high school, 4.0 was the highest you could get.
Yeah, so most high schools grade on a 4-point system, but if they offer college credit classes or AP classes, then they can also grade on a 5-point spectrum, meaning that if you were to take only AP classes, you could end up with a 5.0 GPA, theoretically. But yeah, so taking AP classes and college credit classes in high school will give you a little edge over other students with a 4-point or above GPA, which is pretty nice.
When you get up to that, like 4.2, do you feel pressure to maintain that once you hit that?
Oh, absolutely. It's kind of like a something I do with my bank account, for example, is if I get over $100, I won't drop under $100 because I want to save money up. And it works exactly like that with your GPA. You get to 4.2 and you don't want to drop below that. You just want to keep moving forward, which it's some self-competitive system that all of the top students make that is very toxic to us, because obviously we need a break, but having that goal of a 4.2 or above doesn't really allow for that. So
that's got to make it difficult to take classes that we would consider to be relaxing. Like, let's say something choir or well, you probably have AP choir, don't you?
most likely.
Most likely. But taking classes like court sports, for instance, things that are more relaxing. Do you feel pressure to choose your classes based on what it can get you in your GPA?
Absolutely. I've actually never taken an arts class or any other like freedom class in high school until my last semester, which was just ended this February. Mm-hmm. I took ceramics, which I've heard is one of the most relaxing classes you can take. That class drove me insane because it was the only class where I could actually relax in. And that was such a weird feeling to me and something I'd never experienced in high school that it stressed me out being in there, actually in a normal classroom for once. I couldn't really get off my AP high horse, I guess. I was stuck in that mindset, and having a relaxing class kind of drove me insane. It was interesting.
That's a really, really great point, because we see that kind of drive can be something that drives you to be successful, but it can also be harmful. How does this impact things like, say, sleeping, eating, those types of things?
That kind of commitment to having to do everything that you can with AP classes, with college credit classes, it starts to take over your life a little bit because you're expected to do grade work that's above where you're at. You're a high school student expected to do freshman in college, sophomore in college. Some people even do junior year college work in high school, and they're expected to keep up on all their other classes, keep up on their sleep, with their food, and the homework load. Let me tell you, if you're a full schedule student, an athlete, or any other extracurricular, you're getting home at 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock every night with 3+ hours of homework. Plus, you're expected to have a social life, you're expected to eat, and you're expected to just visit with your family. And that doesn't really happen. Most of my time is spent at my desk, and my mom brings me dinner. And that's our talk for the night, just about. It's like a 5-minute little, hey, how are you doing? Good, thanks. All right, enjoy homework. That's all it really is sometimes.
So somehow in all of that, you've been able to maintain and cope and pull this all together and graduate. I know you're going to graduate, here coming up soon, I'm sure. But how do you think this impacts where how you look at college and where you go in college?
So I recently heard back from all of the colleges I applied to. A lot of them were disappointing results, which is fine. I applied to a lot of schools that are kind of a crapshoot in that sense of 5% acceptance rate, 7% acceptance rate. You're not guaranteed to get in. But that still bothered me a lot because I feel like I've done every single thing right. And it's definitely a little entitled feeling because I do all of these things and I put in all the work, that college really just becomes like the end goal of if you don't end up at an Ivy League, if you don't end up at Stanford, you're not doing the best. You're not doing everything you can. So it's kind of toxic in that way of how we look at these top colleges versus I'm going to end up at the U of O Honors College, an excellent school. But if you told me that 2 months ago, I would have been devastated because it's a taboo subject for a lot of AP students and stuff like that.
So there's a lot of pressure to get the title, get to the right college. I can tell you from my perspective, I'm a licensed psychologist. I graduated from college a long time ago. I went to Willamette University here in Salem, Oregon, and I got my doctorate at George Fox University. And no one ever asks me those questions. No one ever says, this is who I am because of where I went. But for a student, that perspective just isn't there. Because for you, what you're seeing, and what I'm hearing you say is that you're seeing that getting into the Ivy League school, getting into that place, that's been the goal. Where do you think that goal came from?
That goal is something that I've actually asked myself a lot. I've never really known where that goal came from, other than the fact that it kind of just comes from what kids would call it now, the clout of going to those schools. It's something that's cool, something that you do above your peers, something that sets you apart from everyone else because it's such a limited selection. And I feel like, just bring us back to our earlier conversation about social media, it's kind of bragging rights. Like, you want to be the best because it looks better on social media. It gets you more followers, more likes, more congratulations. And I think it's really just like an ego game almost for a lot of people.
And that becomes a thing regardless of where you're at, regardless of your high school. This seems to be something that's all across America going on right now. Do you think it's a function of social media, or did this happen before?
I mean, I know that Ivy Leagues have always been looked at as the top schools for all of kind of all of the social climate and American history just about. And I really think that's always been something that's existed, but it hasn't really picked up as much steam as it has until social media was introduced, because then it gave them a leverage platform of, I'm going to go to this top school, whereas other people can't really celebrate that they're going to community college. Everyone going to college or trade school or just going straight into the workforce has something to be happy about, but we're only really celebrating and congratulating those that are going to these top schools. So,
yeah, that's really interesting perspective. And I want to highlight, recent Pew Research study said that when it comes to the pressures teens face, academics tops the list. 61% of teens say they feel a lot of pressure to get good grades, which is exactly what you're talking about. Now, by comparison, about 3 out of 10 kids say they feel a lot of pressure to look good and fit in socially. So even now, that whole idea of looks and where we fit and cliques and things like that, I'm not hearing that that's like the thing nowadays. It's more getting those good grades. While about 1 in 5 feel similarly pressured to be involved in extracurricular activities and to be good at sports. So what we're really seeing is kind of, I hear you describing this shift to be more about that academic pressure. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about the role that social media plays in all of this. This is Talk2BeWell.
I'm feeling so cool, top to the bottom, just cool. Every little thing that I do, man, I'm just feeling so cool. Yeah. Lately I've been feeling so cool. Top to the bottom, just cool. Every little thing that I do, man, I'm just feeling so cool. It's like, ooh, maybe I should follow my nose, settle for $1 or $2, man, I'm just feeling so cool.
And we're back with Talk2BeWell, talking about social media and the role it plays in anxiety. I know we hear a lot about all of the studies around social media and how there's like the Instagram and Finstagram and all of the other types of things that go along with that. How does social media and those pressures that you get from your peers, how does that contribute to your anxiety?
It contributes pretty strongly just because, again, people use social media not only to talk about their personal lives, but also their school lives. So a lot of people on Snapchat, for example, the only things that they'll post on their stories are pictures of their homework, reminding you that you have to do your homework. And it's kind of just like this weird bragging right system of, hey, I'm doing my homework, my life is together. And then it kind of just like guilts you into, oh, shoot, they're doing their homework, I have to do my homework. And that's my personal experience with it. And I know that's how a lot of other people see it.
But you're also pretty much a high achiever. I mean, you're going to be, the sense I get from you is that you're highly competitive. You're going to get out there. You want to have that top GPA. You want to wear that valedictorian cap when you walk down the aisle at graduation. What about kids who maybe aren't academically gifted, aren't those types of high achievers? How do you think that academic anxiety plays out for them?
Going back to what we were talking about earlier with the bragging rights on social media, it definitely affects them negatively in a lot of ways because it kind of sets them apart. It ostracizes them from the group that is the high achievers and makes them feel like they're less than their peers just because they don't have all the bragging rights on social media. They don't have all of these other things to shoot for, and that usually leads down a really bad road. They have to find other things to brag about, other things to show off about, which can be partying, that can be alcohol, that can be drugs, and that's all too frequent on social media. As a high school student, I see underage drinking on almost a daily basis on Snapchat stories. On Instagram, people will post pictures of their parties, stuff like that. And more often than not, those are the lower in quotation students on that spectrum. So it's pretty negative for them just because of how people see this entire social media picture of their lives.
You know, it's interesting because I think we've talked a little bit about how anxiety disorders are the most common mental health concern in the U.S. We know that an estimated 40 million adults in the U.S. have an anxiety disorder. Meanwhile, 8% of children and teenagers experience it as well. And academic anxiety can almost be like that gateway to really fomenting out a generalized anxiety disorder. Most people really begin to develop those symptoms, though, into adulthood about the age of 21. But what I'm starting to see is our teens are developing anxiety, true anxiety disorders, diagnosable anxiety disorders at a much earlier age. When did you notice for yourself that really anxiety was a factor in your world?
Oh, gosh. I think anxiety has always been something that I've been aware of in my life, just because I've been told my entire life it runs in our family, my mom, my brother, and my dad. And it was especially seen for me in the silliest of ways. I can order my own Subway sandwich. I had to have my brother do it for me because social anxiety was so bad for me when I was younger that, like, trying to tell them, oh, I want a foot-long sandwich with this, too difficult. You couldn't make me do it. It was like pulling teeth, essentially, which is when I first learned I had anxiety. And that's when I first started realizing how it was affecting my life through social, academic, and general anxiety.
How old would you say you were about then?
That was probably when I was 8 or 9, really. It was pretty clear just because my mom kind of gave me the talk of, oh, you're going to have to deal with anxiety. I was like, oh, great. Don't know what that means entirely because I'm 8 or 9, but lovely. Thanks.
Well, and what a really healthy relationship with a parent, though, for a parent to be able to say, you know, you've got anxiety and you need to deal with that. I remember this was probably about 6-8 months ago. One of my son's friends jumped in the car and said, I've got seasonal affective disorder, and this is what I'm going to do with it, and explains that how he deals with that and stuff like that. And I'm like, that's really cool. Not that you have seasonal affective disorder, but the fact that you can talk about, just like if you'd sprain your ankle and how you rehab that. I wonder if you can talk about, you know, here you are 8 or 9 years old, recognizing that you can't even order a Subway sandwich. You have to have somebody do that for you. What are some of the strategies that you've used to cope with anxiety and push yourself out? Because right now we're talking on a podcast that's going to go out all across the country, and you're pretty chill.
Yeah, you didn't have to bring that part up. No, I feel like this actually is how I kind of overcame my anxiety because it definitely had a very strong role in my life all the way up until my freshman year of high school when I joined our leadership program at the high school, because then I was kind of like forced to talk to people. I was forced to do all of these extroverted things, and it's kind of just helped push me outside of my comfort zone and help me become like a person that's not defined by my anxiety, but something, it's just become like a little bit of who I am rather than who I am as a whole. So I would say that getting out of my comfort zone has helped exponentially with getting over it.
You know, what I think is really interesting is the way that you describe that this is a piece of you. It becomes, in essence, a source of strength as opposed to what defines you. And I think that's part of where those of us who are professionals working in the world of mental health and helping people, you know, in recovery and helping them come through, is that we can never take away a mental health condition. I can't make it go away. I can't, you know, all of those other good things. What we have to figure out how you do is you make that a source of strength and make that a part of you and something that helps to inform who you are, but it doesn't define you. And that's really what recovery from any mental health condition is about. So I'm really glad to hear that at this stage in the game, you're already there, because those types of strategies of how you take a strength and make it, how you take a, you know, something like anxiety and make it a strength are great. You mentioned your participation in student leadership, and I know just because I've known you for a while that that's really important to you, but I'm wondering if you could share some of those experiences that really kind of defined why student leadership became so important for you.
So I was blessed with being a student in Oregon, especially a student leader, because I had access to the Oregon Association of Student Councils, where was when I really first found out who I truly am and came out of came out of my shell and left the empty husk of who I was behind and became who I am today. Because I went to the OASC summer camp, which really, you're just surrounded by a bunch of strangers, essentially. I'd never met any of them before in my life, and I trusted them more than anyone I've been around my entire life. It's the friendliest group of people. It's the most welcoming environment, and it kind of just like, it lets you be you without fearing any repercussions, because everyone there is accepting, they're loving, and they will take you for whoever you are. And I think that alone, that leadership experience alone, has put me on the track that I'm on today.
You know, it's interesting. When I was in high school, there would be campaigns that would run so that you'd have your student body president. It was always we used to call them the socias, you know, the people who were popular. Mm-hmm. And some of the things we talked about earlier in the days of, you know, the people who looked good and the people who were, you know, sports oriented and the people, the jocks and the cheerleaders and things like that. But I think student leadership has changed to be different than that. Is that what you see too?
I definitely think that's kind of become more of the movement that we've all gone on with student leadership. Everyone really is concerned with who they're representing now. It's no longer just a matter of popularity. People actually vote on ASB presidents or ASB whatever it is based on what they can do, rather than just saying, oh, I'm the pretty girl on the cheerleading team, I can get us longer lunch periods. It's more of the kids who are sitting here. I know you already talked with a group of students about Youthline. Mm-hmm. They're voting for those students because they know that they can actually make a change and they have the drive to do it. And I feel like that's just become the new movement, just because these students are actually recognizing they have a platform to actually make the changes that they want to see.
You know, it sounds a lot like you're talking about the culture of a school, and that you as a student leader have a piece of responsibility in the culture of a school and how your school is. And I'm wondering if maybe there's some places that we can talk about in our next segment around school culture and how academic anxiety really kind of feeds into the culture of a school and what happens there when we come back after this short break. This is Talk to Be Well.
But I wonder where you are when I was on my lowest down on my knees, and you said you had my back, so I wonder where we are. But all the roads you took came back to me, so I'm following them, not that it leads to you. I'm not that it leads to you. I'm nothing I can do. I'm not that it leads to you. Following to you. I'm not that it leads to you. I'm nothing I can do. Following.
And this is Dr. Robin Henderson. I'm back with Derek Evans, and we're talking about academic anxiety and some of those pressures that happen in a school culture. I know a lot of high school can be defined by athletics, and the school year goes from football season to to basketball season to track and baseball, and put some soccer in there in between, and it's really defined by academics. How do you see athletics really playing in that space of academic anxiety?
So I have been a three sport athlete for all 4 years of high
Wow.
school. And what that's meant it's caused me to miss a lot of school. We have to drive about 45 minutes to an hour and a half to all of our competitions, all of our games, all of that stuff. So that means I'm missing normally like 2 or 3 class periods at the end of my day just to go do a sport and then get home later at night and then still be expected to wake up on time the next morning with all of my homework done, which realistically speaking doesn't happen that frequently. If I have a track meet in, let's say, Beaverton, I'm going to be getting home at like 9 o'clock to 9:30 sometimes. And by the time I'm done, I'm going to be asleep the second I get to bed, or the second I get home. So that is already putting student athletes behind. It's causing a lot of anxiety with that, as well as just missing lessons in classes, especially with all of the games taking place at the end of the school day. We're missing 14 class periods in like 5th, 6th, 7th period, which
Wow.
is not very good. It causes a lot of anxiety for a lot of people and also poses a big risk for students that already struggle with some classes, but also don't want to miss out on the opportunity of high school athletics.
Well, especially I imagine for some students, athletics is how you get into college.
Yeah.
And for many of our students, having that athletic component is the driver. Sometimes that can impact academic achievement, and that's what I hear you saying, which can contribute to anxiety. How do you see that play out?
So normally how that works is students have to keep up their grades in order to play their sport. So for football, for example, you have to take 5 classes at my school and keep above, I believe, a D, which is normally pretty easy for a lot of the students. But for some of them that put in extra time after practice, for example, that starts to take away from their grades pretty frequently. And eventually it just becomes a balancing act of keeping up on your grades, keeping up on your sports, where if you lose out on one of them, then you might lose the opportunity for both of them because you might fail out of school or you might not have the grades to play your sport. And that can just be terrifying for some students. It can be borderline debilitating for them with getting their homework done.
How common do you think academic anxiety is amongst your peers?
Amongst my peers, I don't think there's a single person that I take classes with who doesn't deal with academic anxiety in some way, shape, or form, just because everyone in some way deals with it, whether that's they forgot to do their homework and they get to school and they're having that sudden sinking feeling in their stomach, like, I forgot about this assignment, or, oh no, we have a quiz next period and I didn't read on the material. And although those are pretty common feelings for everyone, that's still a form of academic anxiety because you are still feeling anxious about it, you're nervous about it, and it will most likely take an effect on how you do on that assignment, in that class, or on that test.
You know, I'm a psychologist by training, and there's a famous psychoanalyst, Carl Jung, who talks a lot about dream work, and some of the common dreams that people have that inform that type of therapy are literally the academic anxiety, where you wake up and your dream is that you suddenly realize you forgot an entire class for a semester. Have you ever had that dream?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's a common archetype dream, and just so you know, that's your mind working out your anxiety, and that's perfectly normal. But you wake up in that panic, don't you? And you really begin to wonder.
Yeah, that's definitely something I deal with. In fact, I'm pretty sure I had that dream a few nights ago, and it's spring break, so it wasn't perfect.
Well, I want to take a question from social here from Danny Lynn, who really needs looking for some advice. What do I say to my friend who fails a class or a big test and thinks that their whole life is over?
That's a tough situation to be in, especially coming from a student who cares a lot about their grades. One bad grade or one bad test can make the difference for the rest of your semester, school year, or the rest of your high school experience, really. But the best thing that you can say to them is just it's not the end of the world. You can't have success without failure because it's kind of yin and yang. You have to keep up on your successes, of course. You have to pay attention to those, but you have to look at your failures and just learn to grow from them. With my pre-calculus class I took as a as a junior, I failed the first test by a landslide. It was a disaster. And I had the option of dropping a class right then and there, or of looking at what I did, how I studied, and how I could do it differently. And I ended up talking to the teacher about it, and just getting to talk with the teacher and showing him that I cared, he bumped my grade up a little bit and told me how to study for the next test. So it's really just about not giving up and just continuing to try.
I think that's really important advice, especially for people who are dealing with academic anxiety. So who gives you that advice? Where are the outlets you have to talk about that? Where did you learn some of those strategies?
Realistically, that came from my older brother who went through the same exact teacher, but it's also a common strategy that a lot of students in my group talk about. With school, you end up in a clique one way or another, and whether you realize it or not. And my clique happens to be more of the advanced students. So whenever we're in a class together, we talk about how to get a better grade in that class, how to do this, how to do that. And it kind of just sets up this environment of helping each other out.
Well, and that brings us to another question from social media. And this one, this comes from Davin. He's asking, I'm afraid I won't get accepted into a good college and I'm going to let my family down. All my friends are getting good grades. What's wrong with me? What would you say to Davin? Because you're hanging with all these high achievers, but I imagine you know people who, even though they try really hard, they're not getting your grades.
And that's just sadly how it is sometimes. And school, again, as you were saying, you can go to a school that's not an Ivy League, not Stanford, and still become super successful in life. It's not the end of the world if you don't get accepted to your dream school or the school that your mom wants you to go to. You have opportunities elsewhere, and you just have to keep trying and show them what you're doing, that you're trying, and hopefully everything pays off.
I imagine there are a lot of myths out there about academic anxiety and misconceptions. What are some of those misconceptions that you'd like to bust?
So a lot of people that deal with just borderline anxiety or a different type of anxiety disorder will often try to belittle those that deal with academic anxiety, just claiming that it's something everyone deals with. Don't tag anxiety to the end of it and try to act like there's something going on in your life that puts you at some sort of a disadvantage, which is really sad because anxiety is anxiety no matter how you tag it at the end. It's still something you deal with and something that everyone who says that academic anxiety, borderline anxiety, or just general anxiety disorder deals with. So it's completely valid in every way that's used, especially with academic anxiety.
So when do you feel that you're most vulnerable to this type of anxiety? What situations set you up for stress?
I feel like when I'm most vulnerable is at home when doing homework, just because I'm not around the peers who are going through the same thing as me, and I don't have that evidence that people are struggling just as much as I am, because it seems like it's just me. So being around the schoolwork, being around the constant notifications on my phone of teachers adding stuff to Google Classroom, of quiz that reminding me to study, that's probably when I'm most vulnerable, just because it's when I'm most exposed as well.
Well, when we come back from this last break, we're going to talk about some tips and tricks that we can use to deal with academic anxiety and how we can move forward in a more positive way. We'll be back with Talk to Be Well.
I belong with you, you belong with me, my sweetheart. I belong with you, you belong with me, my sweetheart. I don't think you're right for him. Think of what it might have been if you took a bus to Chinatown. I'd be standing on
we're back. I'm Dr. Robin Henderson, and this is Talk to Be Well with our guest, Derek Evans, and we're talking about academic anxiety and really anxiety in general. You know, more than half of college students who visited their campus counseling centers during the 2015-2016 academic year reported symptoms of anxiety. So it's not something that just happens to high school students. It happens in college, it happens in your professional life, and for those parents and other adults out there, it's happening there too. So when we're looking at anxiety and how overwhelming that can be, why don't we take some time and talk about how we actually deal with anxiety? What do you do? When you start to feel anxious, what do you do?
So when I start to feel anxious, I luckily have access to a lot of trails around my house and my community. So running is my scapegoat, kind of. When I get anxious, I run and I come back and I'm focused. I feel good. And it's really been a lifesaver for me, I would say. My other thing that's not nearly as healthy is Oreos. Oreos are by far one of the most helpful things with dealing with anxiety. Stress eating helps occasionally, especially when it's Oreos. So,
Well, I think if you combine Oreos and running, you could probably pull that off. Please not the carrot cake Oreos. I saw those the other day, and they looked a little bit scary to me. I know for me, as a professional, I deal with anxiety periodically, and especially for those of you who may be of the female persuasion, anxiety can also be heightened when you go through menopause. And so for me, I had to learn some deep breathing exercises and also meditation. I created my own little private beach in my head. And when I start to feel anxious, I take a few minutes, take a break, and I meditate, and I go to my beach. And my beach has all different types of things out there. It's got warm water, it's got sand, and sometimes it might even have a tasty adult beverage for me. But that's kind of how I deal with my anxiety. I think there's some other types of tips and tricks that we can also talk about as well. When someone talks to you about their anxiety, what do you tell them?
I try not to tell them anything really, just because they are dealing with something that I haven't experienced before. And especially for me, just having someone to talk to and vent to is more helpful than having someone to act like they're listening and just belt stuff back at me. That just adds to the anxiety a little bit. So I think just having someone to listen to is one of the best things you can do to deal with your anxiety. Just have someone you can talk to without having them feel like they need to be a trampoline with throwing everything you're dealing with right back at you.
That's a really interesting way to say that, being that trampoline that just tosses it back at you or says, well, why are you anxious? You shouldn't be worried about that. How helpful is that?
Not helpful.
Not helpful.
Not helpful.
Well, NAMI has some tips and tricks for managing anxiety. And one of them that they talk about is how you manage your time through prioritizing. Do you find yourself using that strategy?
Yeah, I also use my phone for my planning, my scheduling, mostly just because it's a little inconvenient to always have a planner on me because I don't carry a handbag, for example. So just being able to pull my phone out, being able to look at what I have to do, look at my timeline for everything, that helps out exponentially because I know when I have time for something and when I don't, so I don't accidentally add too much stuff to my plate for a single day.
Now, that's a really good, helpful point. We have another question from Facebook. How can I tell the difference between being nervous for a test or when it's something more serious? Our listener, Amy, is asking, and I think this kind of goes to how do you know when your anxiety is more than you alone can deal with?
I think that question in itself is almost the answer. Once it becomes something that you can't get off your mind and something that you feel constantly, that's when you know that you might have an issue and when you might have anxiety instead of just being nervous. So I think just being able to be honest with yourself and being able to realize what you need as an individual, that's the most helpful thing that you can do, is just be able to be honest with yourself and tell, am I just feeling nervous and will this pass? Or is this something that is reoccurring and something that won't necessarily pass just because the test is gone?
You know, that's a really good point. When we look clinically at anxiety, if it becomes something that starts to take over your life, that's the point at which you need more professional help. And we know as psychologists and other therapists, there's a lot of great treatments out there for anxiety. We can do a lot to help people learn how to take the strategies you've talked about, exercising, eating appropriately, getting rest and sleep, and all of those other types of things. But there are other strategies too around deep breathing exercises and other types of ways to really intervene in an anxiety attack when it starts to become very debilitating. Because anxiety attacks are really serious. We know in our emergency departments, for instance, we see a number of people who think they're having a heart attack when really it's a panic attack. And that can be a very frightening and kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because you begin to think, oh, I'm having a heart attack, I'm going to get more anxious, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That can be something that really a professional needs to help intervene and help give somebody strategies. So for any of you out there listening, if you feel that anxiety is something that you're struggling with and you really are having a tough time getting over that, please seek professional help. Go see your primary care physician, your other healthcare provider, and say, you know, I'm struggling with anxiety, because help is there. We can really help you with that. So how, as we're starting to look at some of those other tips and tricks, how do you see some of your friends coping with anxiety?
So some of my friends will simply just want to hang out with other friends, because having other people around is one of the best things you can do for yourself if you're dealing with anxiety. If you are isolating yourself, all you're doing is giving yourself more time in your thoughts, which can be really, really unhealthy, because rather than talking with your friends about good things, you're talking with yourself about bad things, which, although I will say self-care time is important, it's also good to be rationed out with time with your friends, time with your family, time with your dog or cat or whatever animal you go to for support. So I really think that personally in my life, spending time with others is one of the best things I can do for my mental health and my anxiety.
So when you're working as a student leader and you're looking at school culture, are there activities that you've seen schools use that perhaps have helped during stressful times like finals? What are some of those tips and tricks that you might offer to other high schools?
So I know some schools will do relaxation rooms, kind of, where they will put pillows, they'll put snacks, they'll put all of these things where if you're having a hard time, you can go to that room and just relax for a second. Because that's oftentimes what a lot of students need, is just a little break from their stressful day. Whereas at my school, for example, we've had clubs sell donuts at lunches or in the morning, just because sometimes you can go to school with nothing to look forward to. But if you have a sugary donut waiting for you at school, it can be pretty helpful.
I remember back when I was in college, we used to, during finals week, we would often get care packages from loved ones that would have snacks, ramen, always a college favorite, and things like that. And I think as parents and other adults, as we're working with teens, we need to remember that finals especially are a really tough time. And coming out there and saying, how are your finals going every morning, probably is not the most helpful strategy. But having those care packages and just those little pick-me-ups and maybe a Post-it note on the mirror that says, you're doing a great job, go get them today, or whatever, can really make a big difference between how you're dealing with your anxiety, how you're feeling about yourself, and what you do. I imagine that that's the same for peers to peers. And perhaps things like putting sticky notes on people's lockers, or, coming in the morning and having that hot cocoa or sugary donut are treats that we need to think about as all of us in how we deal with anxiety, not only in school, but also in the workplace. Remember, we're all here together in the same human condition, right?
Yep, definitely.
So anything else that you want to share about your experiences as we begin to wrap up here today?
I really think that one of the most important things to get out there is not only just for students, but for parents as well. Just because your student isn't thriving doesn't mean that they're worth less than other students, that they're lazy, or anything else is going on down that road. They may just be dealing with academic anxiety, because I know that in my life, I've had friends who their parents look down on them because they're not getting a 4.0 and they're not doing their homework on time, when realistically, that student is struggling. And parents, more often than not, don't fully understand that, and they'll just look at it as, my student has senioritis, my student is lazy. That's not how it is all the time. A lot of the time it's just academic anxiety, general anxiety, or some bigger, broader issue that's going on in their life that's not being completely understood.
You bring up another really, really good point. If you see your student or yourself begin to have a change where maybe you were a really successful student and life has changed and things are different, you could be suffering from depression or some other type of mental health condition. And it's always a great idea to have a conversation with someone, to talk with your primary care provider, and to really get help, because all of these different types of mental health challenges, they begin to foment when we're in high school, they begin to foment as young adults, and we really need to be more conscious about taking care of them just like we would anything that happens with our physical health. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with Talk to Be Well.
In your eyes, there's a heavy blue. One to love and one to lose. Sweet divine, the heavy truth. Water or wine, don't make me choose. I wanna feel the way that we do that summer night. Drunk on a feeling, alone with the stars in the sky. I've been running through the jungle, I've been running with the wolves to get to you, to get to you. I've been down the darkest alley, saw the dark side of the moon to get to you, to get to you. I look for love in every stranger, took too much easy anger, all for you, yeah, all for you. I've been running through the jungle, I've been crying with the wolves to get to you, to get to you, to get to you. Your fingertips trace my skin to places I have never been. Blindly I'm following. Break down these walls and come on in. I wanna feel the way that we do that summer night. Drunk on a feeling, alone with the stars in the sky. With the wolves to get to you, to get to you. I've been down the darkest alleys, saw the dark side of the moon to get to you, to get to you. I look for love in every stranger, took too much easy anger, all for you, yeah, all for you. I've been running through the jungle, I've been crying with the wolves to get to you, to get to you, to get to you.
All right, and you're back with Talk to Be Well. I'm Dr. Robin Henderson and my special guest, Derek Evans. Derek, it's not often you get to sit and have a conversation with a doctor, but do you have any questions for me as we wrap up today?
Yeah, thank you. I really think that I have a question I'm sure a lot of other students have, which is, you're obviously trained in this field. Is there any advice or coping mechanisms that you could tell us that would help us deal with our academic anxiety?
So really, it comes down to a lot of the things that you've brought up and talked about today. How you find ways to push yourself outside your comfort zone to realize that you can be successful is the first way to start to begin to master your anxiety, to really do the things that scare you. We talk a lot about facing your fears and bringing it forward. We have a term that we use, a little acronym about fear. Fear is false evidence that appears to be real. And we find often that false evidence, the thing that we're afraid of, is actually something that we can embrace and make part of ourselves and can actually be a very joyful thing. But if you also find that those fears are beginning to become unrealistic and taking over your life, and you're becoming depressed and you're unable to enjoy the activities that normally bring you joy, I would ask that you reach out to a teacher, a trusted friend, anybody, and know that help is there for you. We recently did a segment with volunteers from Youthline of Oregon who gave some very, very good tips about how to develop even simple things like taking a deep breath and learning what they called 4 square breathing, so that when you start to feel that anxiety pit in your stomach, like we all do, take a deep breath and train yourself to be able to calm down. But the biggest piece of advice is to listen to your body and listen to, what signs they're telling you, because sometimes fear is a really good thing. If I'm on the edge of the Grand Canyon and I'm not afraid, I think I've got a little bit different problem. Because, if I'm not afraid of falling right off that edge there, fear is what also can protect us from doing things that are probably not wise for us to do. However, when fear becomes debilitating, we really need to go out and seek help. So I want to thank you, Derek, for being so courageous and sharing your story with us and sharing your story with students all over the country, because it's really important to talk about anxiety and how you deal with that. It's something we're going to all deal with for the rest of our lives. Any parting thoughts you have?
No, I just really want to thank you too for talking with all of us and just helping out. So thank you.
Well, thanks to all of our listeners and sending in your questions. If you're in crisis or need peer support, call 1-800-273-TALK. That's 1-800-273-8255. Or send a text to 741-741. There's someone there to talk with you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they can help you be well. To everyone listening, please visit our blog at Work2BeWell. That's Work2BeWell at wellbeingtrust.org for more information and tips to cope with issues like academic anxiety. We hope you will comment and share. That way we can all support each other as we all journey to be well. We look forward to future conversations on more mental health topics. And if you've got ideas about topics that we should be talking about, feel free to send them in with the hashtag Talk2BeWell. Make sure to follow hashtag Work2BeWell Student Advisory Council on Instagram at Work2BeWell. You can also follow the Wellbeing Trust on social media. Search for hashtag Talk2BeWell. That's hashtag Talk2BeWell on all major podcast platforms. And thank you again. We'll see you next time on Talk2BeWell.